My company name is Fair. What we're trying to offer is trust, just a bit of trust, which is needed in interactions to make sure that everything flows easily. And we firstly focus on the mobility industry, because with a long track record in mobility as a service and also as a member and consultant to the UITP, the Union Internationale de Transport Public, so the global set of authorities and operators in transport, and also helping the European Commission on drafting new regulation around the possibilities that we have with digitization now. Collaboration is key. I think that if you look at society right now with the very big platforms, even an IKEA, right, or a car industry, we are trying to do everything ourselves, right? We want to have control over everything. Whilst in the end, it's far more fun to collaborate, right? As long as you can trust that the other participants are doing their thing, right? But we constrain that to one kind of organization. I believe in data spaces that organizations can contribute with their specialisms, right? So what they're really good at within the context of something completely different. So imagine that, well, I think that with mobility a lot of people refer to Google Maps, right? So Google Maps really created good algorithms for showing you how to take public transport in a city you don't know. Why not use that? Right? That would be excellent. On the other side is, would we like to have Google to have all the information of all the transactions, the payments, etc., etc.? Why should Google know everything about that? They're really good at what they're offering. Maybe we should offer something which is easy to book and pay for your ticket. And looking at that, in booking and payment, you go through a certain process, right? So that means that if you want to pay for something, your bank needs to authorize that you have enough money on your bank account in order to do that. Or in effect, this would deliver you a ticket. Right? This ticket you want to reuse for anything. So what we're trying to imagine is that the entitlements, right, the titles for your transport are being digitized. So how do you identify yourself? Right? What kind of information is necessary? Because the train doesn't run on your email address or your phone number, right? But they do want to know that you paid. So how can we simplify this with giving you control over your data and identity, right? And creating access to transactional information to all the relevant parties. So where for me iShare comes in is that if you create this level of organizational and legal interoperability, you can create trust amongst the parties. So that means that using Fair is Fair, I could use information that is completely somewhere else, but give access to that based on my, well, contract to go with that train or tram, right? And they want to know what information is required from my end. So these trust components is what we call decentralized. So you don't need to have the direct relationship anymore. And that means that we're turning in a whole different page in the platform economy. Right? It's not the platform that does it all, right? It's the actual interaction that happens between the organizations that do their bit. So that for us is why iShare is really interesting, because it allows an organization to have just one identity on the internet. Right? And that means that I can actually say, but I want that organization to access my information for that activity in the transaction. So that means that I limit the scope of access to my personal credentials, right? And I actually get feedback on the fact that that activity has been performed. So it's a simple mechanism, but with a huge extent. imagine that you never have to buy a ticket from a ticketing or a vending machine ever again, right? You can just travel as long as you have money in your bank account. What would that do for public transport? But on the other hand, you get so much more information from how people travel that on a European scale or at a national scale or regional scale or even local scale, you can imagine that we can rearrange the mobility landscape. Why drive around empty buses? That doesn't make sense, right? And sometimes you just know that a train, like in COVID times, is going to be overcrowded, right? Why not inform people to take a different route or to take a later train? Because now you can. You know that they're going to travel at some point because they bought the ticket in an easy fashion. So learning from information, we can alter the mobility landscape in a more sustainable one. We can take out ticketing altogether, reducing the price for the consumer, right, or the taxpayer. And we can increase on the data insights, which can also help in reaching sustainability goals. So one of the main issues we saw in mobility was all these subscriptions, these applications, all these different sort of convenience tools that actually now get in the way of a seamless experience. So why not throw them out, right? And this is a way in which I think, personally, that we can make public transport and shared mobility more attractive. Because if you can just grab and catch and go, all right, maybe it's a good alternative for having your own car, which is always very costly. For us, which is a huge step for filing for i4Trust, was to have some additional funding in order to create a demonstration environment, a laboratory environment, where we could help transport operators, but also transport authorities, to understand how the data flows. We want to appreciate this more, because usually we're confronted with a black box, right? So we have this design of all these arrows going into the black box and arrows coming out, but no one knows what happens in the black box. The way in which iShare allows us to authenticate other members of the data space that we're in, right? Because they are vouching for their trust, the fact that they signed the same contracts as we did. This helps organizations like transport operators and authorities to see that some governance mechanisms are in place there. It also allows them to understand what iShare does better, right? Because they don't have a clue. If we say iShare now, they go like, yeah, interesting, heard about that, but what does it do? Now we can show them, right? At the same time, we can show them what Fair's Fair does on a consumer to business level, similar as what iShare does on a business to business or business to government level. So that means that in these small ways, we can actually help people understand why they can trust it. Not that they can trust it, but why, because they can see how it goes. An important thing in mobility is that the offerings, right, and the transport operators are huge, right? They're not going to simply switch to something they don't know. This is why they are happy to continue with the very expensive ticketing industry, right? Because they are not sure what happens if they're not in control. And now we can showcase them something where they can understand, hey, but this might be a way in which we could organize things, which is more interesting for us from a data perspective, but also from a cost perspective, right? On the other side, it will help them to see what kind of governance or policy questions still need to be answered. Because technology doesn't solve everything, right? It solves a part of the puzzle. It needs to fit together with a financial strategy, it needs to fit together with a marketing strategy, but also with a regulation or policy strategy. Because everything has to come together. And we're trying to open new doors. So within the mobility data space, I think that there are a lot of new options, right, to actually support the way in which we organize mobility now, thanks to data, but also thanks to collaboration.